Namaste to all participants. I hope everyone has joined and I welcome Dr. M.M. Ali sir to the session. Namaste, this is Dr. Kumar, Assistant Professor in Economics in C Cyber Kolhapur. So in the 5 days FDV program on capacity building in research techniques, today we had already completed with the two sessions, one session. Uh, the first session by Dr. Deepak Balokar sir, Director, Karve Institute of Social Science, Pune. He educated us about hypothesis and its importance. What are the mistakes takes place while constructing a hypothesis, and what kind of confusions both the researchers as well as the research guides come across, and how to overcome these mistakes or confusions, and how we can rightly interpret the hypothesis by understanding it. And also he talked about uh, different tools, statistical tools to be used while testing the hypothesis. Okay, so in a research study, both the hypothesis and the research problem should have connection. Once you the hypothesis, research title as well as the hypothesis in an appropriate manner, it will reduce your work till about 30% of time of your work. Then the next part comes is about the methodology part, because to test the hypothesis, you need, your research is supposed to be supported by the relevant data. So while collecting the data in a research area, we have two broad methods. One is the survey-based method, and second one is uh, secondary data-based methods. So the secondary data-based study, we all know that from the basic theory, which we have already covered in the earlier sessions, that these are available from various sources, like can be digital sources, printed sources, or in various forms like pictographs and other areas. Depending on our research title objectives, the type of data will be chosen. The next important, largely, the researchers conduct primary data-based studies, which involves a lot of uh, what we can say in methods which need to be adopted to collect the reliable data. And here you are interacting with the respondents, and as a researcher, what you are doing, you are collecting the right information from the respondent. So when can I assure that the respondent is having the right responses? When I choose the right respondent. So in this regard, the researcher does selection of the respondents. In a simple way, it is called a selection of the respondents, and in the statistical language, it is called as a sampling, because the respondents always will be in a multiple number or large quantity, and it is the responsibility of the researcher whom to be surveyed so that the reliable data can be collected. So with this brief introduction to the today's topic, selecting appropriate research resources, I welcome today's resource person, Dr. M.M. Ali, Professor in Charge, VPIMSR Sangli. I would like to share a few of his credits with all of you. He has worked as director at C Cyber Kolhapur. He has a very wide range of teaching and administrative experience. He has taught thousands of students since last 37 years, and he had a postgraduate class experiences. He had taught MBA, MCOM, DBM, and research students also. He has guided uh, various research projects. He has guided 12 research projects funded by various agencies and 300 plus MBA projects, 1 or 2 MPhil dissertations, and 51 PhD theses successfully guided and awarded also. He has published 30 papers in various seminars and workshops, and uh, he has published his research papers, around 36 papers in various journals and magazines. He has delivered more than 300 guest lectures across the academia, and he has a membership of various prestigious organizations like uh, various life chairman, examination committee. Then he chaired various committees at the different levels of the institute work. So he was the chairman examination committee, chairman timetable committee, chairman alumni association, and chairman MBA program, chairman research committee. And the recent responsibility he completed is director C Cyber, and he is now associated with Vasantrao Dada Patil Institute of Management Studies and Research, Sangli. So I welcome Dr. M.M. Ali sir on behalf of the management of the Cyber as well as the organizers of this 5 days FDP on capacity building and research techniques. Dr. M.M. Ali sir.
Yes.
To you, sir.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, I think you're on the speaker mode, it seems.
No.
I request all the participants to keep their audio in mute and also video so that you will not face any kind of bandwidth issues.
Hello. Hello. Kishore Kumar, am I audible?
Yes, sir, we are audible, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. Now the thing is, that you made an announcement as to the topic regarding this secondary source and all, but my subject is made clear, na?
No, no, sir. I have given that as an introduction.
Yeah.
And I have ended with the sampling technique only.
Okay. Right. So I welcome all the participants. And then I would like to first brief as to my topic. What I would be discussing covers mainly what are the fallacies about research. Then I would highlight upon what are the errors in the research process. And then I will come to the sampling techniques. This would be the focus of my and the scope of my discussion. Of course, I am not here to teach all the participants because they are all learned people and the literature is very much available with them. Basically, I am interested in sharing all my experiences for the last 3.5 decades regarding the research at the PhD level as well as the MPhil level. So first let me clarify the fallacies about the research, which has been stereotyped for the last 2-3 generations. The first fallacy, that is their misconception, or what you can say as the preconceived notion about the research. Most of the scholars have one basic fallacy that research is equal to bulky or say fat reports. Invariably, every scholar who comes to me, he asks me the questions, sir, as to what would be the total number of pages of the report or the thesis. So here we are bogged down with the number of pages. But basically, let me tell you, when you talk about the research, their quantity does not matter, quality matters. And let me tell you that I have seen a thesis of 46 pages, as well as I have seen a thesis of 600 pages, which has been bound in 2 volumes. So, and if you ask me which one was the best, I would say the one which I have got through the 46 pages, that was the best thesis what I have read so far. So the point what I would like to convey is that let us not have this misconception that the more the number of pages, the quality of the research. That is not the case. So here, please remove from your mind that research means something that you have to produce some bulk or some fat reports. This is one misconception. Secondly, most of the students come to me and ask me that, sir, what should be the primate survey I should carry out in terms of the completing my research. So there is another equation, that is research is equal to survey. Not necessarily that every research should have the survey attached to the research activity. Why? Because even, of course, no doubt, for the primary data, survey is the most important element, no doubt about it. But at the same time, sitting at the desk, having a secondary data, one can come out with the world-class research quality. That is only and only with the help of the secondary data. So along with the secondary data, supporting the survey method also reinforces the quality of your research, no doubt about it. So this is the second fallacy. Please remember that research is not necessarily all the time equal to survey. And then now coming to the third fallacy, that research is considered as the diagrammatic representation. And wherever I go for the Viva host, and I find that most of the thesis is fully loaded with all the diagrammatic representations. And there I just ask certain questions to the scholars to clarify some of the diagrams that they have reproduced in their thesis. And let me tell you that the student is unable to clarify as to what exactly that particular diagram connotes the meaning. So they are unable to give me the satisfactory answer. What is done is here that you simply give your information to the some private processing center, computer center, and then they just go out with the SPC package and then fully load with all the diagrams. So again, not necessarily that every research should have the diagrammatic representation. If the analysis is being done and the interpretation is done in the right perspective, I think the quality automatically reflects in your research. Then now coming to the topic what I will be discussing, that is regarding the sampling techniques. So there again, every student has memorized one equation, that is sample is equal to random. When I asked the question as to what was your sampling technique, 99% students say, sir, I have undergone with the random sampling technique. Then I asked him to throw some more light as to what exactly he has done in terms of the selecting the sample. And finally, when you go into the details, you would find that he has used some totally different technique of sampling, not necessarily the random sampling. So this is another fallacy about research. And finally, to conclude this fallacies about the research, regarding the review of literature, the question that is asked by most of the researchers is, sir, I have to carry out the review of literature, so how many reviews should I take? So let me tell you that there is no equation that literature review is equal to so many reviews. No, it all depends upon the research problem, what you undertake, and depending upon the research problem, how much research inputs have gone in, that decides the total number of reviews that you have to undertake. There is no such formula that a review of literature means that you have to go for 60 or 70 reviews, nothing of that sort. If it is an exploratory research, then you would find the very scanty review of literature, because the research is in the inception stage, or maybe yours is an innovative research. Say if it is a descriptive research, and in terms of the descriptive research, there they would find lot many reviews, and there you can decide upon the number of the review of literature. So these are some of the fallacies about the research process. So please come out of these fallacies, and then stick up with the quality of research. Whatever you are doing is, that should be a qualitative one. Don't carry all these misconceptions. Okay. So this is one aspect. Second aspect, what I would like to touch upon is the errors in the research process. Most of the scholars, when they undergo the research process, they come across lot many errors, and at the end they come to know that these are the errors that have been committed, and then they find to their displeasure that so many mistakes are there in the research endeavor, whatever they have carried out. So the errors I would like to take cognizance, so that you are enlightened with these errors, so that you can avoid and then make your research very qualitative one. So what are the research? Basically, the research errors are classified into two. One is the sampling error, and the other one is non-sampling error. So in terms of the sampling error, most of the errors that the sampling error that occurs is the sample mean which the researcher identifies, and if you compare this sample mean with the population mean, you come across that there is a lot of variation between the population mean and the sample mean. And if there is a vast variation, then let me tell you that you are committing a sampling error, or some sample error has already been committed. This you can come to the conclusion. So this is about the sampling error. Now, how to avoid this sampling error? By taking as to what particular technique, that we will come to at a later stage. Now I would like to highlight upon as to what are the non-sampling errors that the researcher commits. Regarding these non-sampling errors, the very first and most important is the defective problem definition. Now, when the problem is being identified, and then you start your research, the errors are committed. So try to avoid the problem definition error. Your problem, what you decide, that should be very crystal clear, and this problem definition, what you give, should pave its path for the subsequent process of your research, such as identifying the objectives, then deciding upon the hypothesis, then what data is to be collected, how it is to be analyzed. All these things will be taken care of, provided that the research problem is defined in the right perspective. So I would cite some few examples where the researcher has identified the problem, and then he has come into trouble, and then later on it has been rectified. Say for instance, that one of the research scholar had taken up one study, and the title of the study was Marketing of Tea Powder in XYZ City. I don't want to name the city, where you can identify the research which has been carried out. Now you tell me, my friends, that marketing of tea powder in so and so city has been carried out. What is the scope for the study in this particular research project?
Ali sir, sorry
Here,
to interrupt you.
yeah,
There is a small announcement. Ms. Pooja Chauhan, could you please mute your mic?
okay.
Ms.
Shall
Pooja
I carry
Chauhan,
on?
Ms. Pooja Chauhan, could you please mute your mic, please? The session is getting disturbed.
Sure. Kishore Kumar,
Yes, sir.
any disturbance?
Yeah, one participant mic is on, sir. So we are requesting her to mute mic. I think she is not publishing. I think.
Please tell me when to start.
Ms. Pooja Chauhan, could you please mute your mic? Ms. Pooja Chauhan. Ms. Pooja Chauhan, final call. Could you please mute yourself? Requesting all the participants, please see that your mic is in mute mode so that the resource person won't get disturbed. Yeah. Ali sir, yes, it's ready. Sorry for
It
interrupting.
is okay, sir.
Okay, shall I continue?
Yes, sir. Yes,
Yes,
sir.
sir.
Oh.
Go ahead.
Yes,
So,
sir. Yes, sir.
let me cite few titles which indicates the defective problem definition. One of the study, as I said, is marketing of tea powder in XYZ city. Here, what the research scholar has done is he has collected the data as to what are the different qualities of tea powder is being sold, what are their prices, and then how it is being promoted, and how it is being distributed. Now you tell me, my friends, that is it a real research problem? Definitely not. Similarly, to cite another example, one of the thesis came to me for evaluation, which was titled as some aspects of advertising in the new millennium. So I was very anxious to know as to what are the innovations and what are the different aspects in advertisement that has come in the which can be applied in the new millennium. So after going through the thesis of 360 and odd pages, I could not find any single new aspect about the advertising literature, whatever I had gone through. Here, the researcher has just loaded from internet all the review of literature regarding advertisement, and then finally the survey indicates visiting some 5 to 6 advertising agencies, and then telling us about that in these advertising agencies these many employees are there, these many phone calls are being received, so many tables and chairs, and this is how the advertising is being taking place in this particular city. So till the last page 368, I could not find any new aspect of advertisement in the new millennium. With a very heavy heart, I had to suggest that this thesis needs some modification. This is what is called as the defective problem definition. Similarly, I would cite another problem, that is the problems and prospects of tourism industry. Here the research scholar has listed down hundreds of problems as to what the tourists are facing, what the middlemen or say the tourist operators they are facing, so on and so forth. But nowhere till the last page I could find as to what is the prospects of this particular tourism industry. So here lies the defect of problem definition. One thesis I would like to cite, which talks about what is that called inventory management. It was titled as Inventory Management in Primary Healthcare Center. Now you tell me, what is the scope to study about the inventory management in a primary healthcare center? And there the research scholar has cited that in this primary healthcare center, there are so many beds, so many mattresses, these many medicines, and the nursing staff and the doctor. When you are asking for the highest university degree of PhD, and then you are taking up this particular problem for study, does it justify? Just let us ask this question to ourselves. Last example I would cite, and all these are, my friends, the problems that have been taken up by these scholars, which I am putting before you. They are the real issues. It's not the imaginary titles, where the problem is not being identified properly, nor it is being defined scientifically, and the researcher is stuck up, and finally he comes across the most unpleasant experience. One research scholar is studying the problems of ex-servicemen. These are all what I call very loose problems. So you may ask me a question, okay sir, how can we decide upon the best research problem? I would simply say that see that your research problem should be, as far as possible, application oriented, or it should add something to the existing literature, or it should add some theory to the existing body of knowledge. Then and only then that this research problem would be worth studying. Otherwise, maybe you would land up with some loose titles, and finally there would be no contribution. So this is the error what one should avoid, and it reminds me of the proverb that well begun is half done. So what you need to do, that your topic should be application oriented, it should be interesting to you as well as to the society, it should add some contribution to the existing body of knowledge, and it should be useful to the society. Then and only then this would be the problem which would be worth for taking up for the study. Coming to the another error in the research process is the defective population definition. Most of my research scholars take up a good problem, but when it comes to defining the population, they are stuck up with a wrong population definition. For example, once again, one of the research scholars had taken up the customer relationship management in hospitality industry. So in terms of this customer relationship management, he has simply surveyed all the clients who are coming to the hotel, and then he has taken the feedback from them as to what is the quality of the quality of the service is being rendered to these customers. Now, I would say that this is the defective population definition, because when you talk about the quality of the service, and not only the frontline managers' feedback need to be taken from the customers or the clients who have experienced this particular service, but there are umpteen number of stakeholders from whom you have to go for the cross verification of this particular data, so as to justify that whatever the quality that these respondents have given, or the responses that you have come across, that justifies the data or the claim what you are making in your research process. Another study is about the ICT in higher education. This gentleman who is studying the information and communication technology in higher education, and that too in the technical institutes, that is the engineering institutes. And in these engineering institutes, what he has done is he has simply gone to the students community and then taken the feedback from the students as to whatever the ICT usage that has been adopted in the higher education, and then he has suggested certain remedial measures. I would say that this population definition is wrong again. Why? Because the users of the ICT, then the stakeholders in terms of the higher education, maybe the student community, the faculty, the administrators, the sellers of these devices of ICT are not being considered as the part and parcel of the population. So this is the population definition error that is being committed by some of the scholars. Recently, one of the research scholars who is studying the work-life balance, and in terms of this work-life balance, he had taken up a study, the problems of expatriates and repatriates. And in terms of this work-life balance of expatriates and repatriates, he has visited all the male expatriates and repatriates, and he has collected the data from them. When he was making a presentation, I asked him a question as to what is your population, and he said, "Sir, all my population is about the male expatriates and repatriates." Then I asked him a question that, "Don't you think that the female repatriates and expatriates are there in India?" So he said, "Yes, obviously there are." And then he has not at all taken a single lady respondent in his. So this is the population error that this particular researcher has carried out. Like this, another researcher had taken up the training need analysis. And in terms of the training need analysis, he has considered the supervisory level employees, and then what is the type of the training is being given to them, what is its impact on the effectiveness and the efficiency of his work. There again, he has committed an error in terms of defining his population. Training is not given only at the supervisory level. Training is also given at the middle management level. So he has not considered this aspect. So this is another defective population definition that is being undertaken by the researchers. So please try to bear in mind that this error is being avoided when your problem has been defined, but at the same time the population has to, you have to make very clear as to what is the population, what is the population unit, what are the elements from whom you are going to consider the responses. The third error is the frame error. What is a frame? A frame is where the population information is collected, and then where you can have access to this particular frame and take this frame as a guiding principle, or maybe to have access to these respondents, you take the help of this frame error. Now, in terms of this, considering this particular frame, most of the research scholars undergo with a wrong frame. For example, the gentleman who had taken up this customer relationship management studies, while considering the frame, he approached the excise department. Why? Because his uncle or some of his relative was in the excise department, and having gone to the excise department, he collected all the addresses of the hotels which are being registered under the excise department. When he came with this population details, I just saw and I could find that all these names seems to be homogeneous hotels. Then I asked him, where from did you collect this particular data? He said that I have taken it from the excise department. And there, the frame, what he had considered for identifying this population is wrong. Why? Because in his population enumeration, he had considered only those hotels which have been registered under excise department having permit room. He had neglected the 3-star hotels, 5-star hotels, some of the restaurants of middle class type. So frame, when you are selecting a particular frame and to identify the or to have access to the population, please see that number one, the frame is updated. The frame consists of the entire spectrum of population. Then the frame is updated. It is not incomplete. Then the frame has to be updated, and over and above, the frame should be accessible to the research scholar. Then maybe you can consider such type of a frame. The other day, one of my research scholar who was studying on a small scale industries study he had taken up, he went to the Manufacturers Association and then he collected all the names of the small scale units from the Manufacturers Association. There again, he has taken up a wrong frame. Instead of going to the district industry center, where in the district industry center, you have the small scale, medium scale, large scale, all these units. So this is another, the error that is committed in terms of the frame error. Coming to the next error, that is the non-response error. In terms of the non-response error, when the respondent has given the responses, and then when you go through the schedule or the questionnaire, you come across that some of the responses have not been responded. So here the researcher becomes a little biased, and then having become a biased, whatever the response is not given, then he either fills up, and whereas he fails to filter out this questionnaire and say very frankly that so many questionnaires have been distributed, and out of these many questionnaires, the responses were missing and incomplete, hence they have been eliminated, and finally, in all respect, the complete questionnaires that have been taken have been these many. He fails to claim in his research. So there, don't add from your side some of the responses which the respondent had not given. Don't commit non-response error. Simply eliminate and then go ahead with all those questionnaires which are complete in all respects. Another error I would like to cite is the measurement error. What the researcher wants to measure and actually what he measures, there he commits an error. Say for example, if you are trying to study the attitude or the opinion of the respondent. Unfortunately, I have come across so many scholars who have
Sir, your voice is not
getting
there.
voice is getting distracted.
Yeah, now it is okay.
Okay.
It is now it is okay, sir.
Okay, shall I continue? No. Okay, voice was getting distracted. Right. Let me proceed. Then the measurement error. Now, in terms of the measurement error, let me tell you that what the researcher does is he wants to study the attitude or the opinion. And then in the questionnaire, I come across the dichotomous questions, yes or no. Now, how can it be an attitude or an opinion where you are forcing the respondent to respond either yes or no to a particular statement? So this is the measurement error where the researcher should avoid committing this particular error. Okay, some of the research scholars have given the 5-point scale. Having given the 5-point scale, and asking the respondents to respond on, I say, highly agree or fully disagree, fully satisfied or fully dissatisfied, whatever it is, the 5-point scale or the 7-point scale, they simply calculate the percentage of the responses. Say for instance, you have taken 100 respondents, and hypothetically I am telling you that all these 100 respondents have scattered over the 5-point scale as 20, 20, 20, 20. 20 respondents have given strongly disagree, 20 respondents have given agree, so on up to strongly disagree. Okay, and here the analysis is being made that the respondents mean is 20% are strongly agreeing, 20% are agreeing. This is wrong interpretation. Why? Because when you are going for a 5-point scale and then their weights are given 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you have to find out weighted mean. Most of the researchers fail to calculate weighted mean. They simply calculate simple percentages based on the number of the responses that has been responded against this 5-point scale. So this is the measurement error, please note. Then the questionnaire, many a times the questionnaire or the schedule that is prepared by the student or the respondent, by the research scholar, is a poor questionnaire. Why I say a poor questionnaire? Because the questionnaire does not contain many a times the linking questions. The questionnaire sometimes does not contain the entire spectrum of variables. Some of the variables would be missing. The phrasing of the questions is wrong. The information what you want and the response alternatives what you have given, there is a mismatch between these two. So like this, the questionnaire is many a times a poor questionnaire. So what is to be done to avoid this? You have to go for a pilot survey, go for a pilot test, see that all the questions are in the right order, whether they are exhaustive, whether the respondent is able to understand, and then response. Another research error is the researcher's biased approach. Many times I find, and all the research scholars know for sure, that when they are finalizing their research work, sometimes they are biased either in terms of analyzing or in terms of interpretation or in terms of proving or disproving the hypothesis. So there, please don't see that the biasness does not come into your research work. As far as possible, try to be very fair, so that your research findings would be the true reflection of your research work. Then the experimental error is another error that is being committed by the researcher. Now, in terms of the experiment, what you are carrying out, you consider a focus group. And in terms of this focus group, there are some variables which you need to control, some variables you need to carry out with the experiment. So here the researcher does not take cognizance of as to what are the variables that has to be controlled, what are the experimental variables, and there he commits a mistake, and then the experiment goes wrong. I'll cite you one example. One of the researcher tried to prepare a training manual for the salesman, and then having taken a focus group of the salesmen and taken the feedback from them, he came out with a training manual. And then this training manual was used for giving the training to the salesmen. And after the training was imparted, then the salesmen were asked to go and perform their duties. And the impact studies was monitored. What happened? After the salesmen went into the field and then they carried out their sales job, and the targets were measured. And it was found that the targets were much more than what was given to them. So this particular researcher or the trainer was very happy, saying that that this research manual is the best training manual, because this gives the best training, and the trainee, yeah, can perform the best in the field, and then he can achieve the targets. But after the next 3 months or so, when the same salesman performed their activities in the field, let me tell you, the sales came down drastically. What went wrong? Then it was found that this particular research, the training manual was not the real or effective training manual. The training that was given was not necessarily the best training. Why? Because after analyzing, it was known that when these salesmen have sold, the season was Diwali season. Being a Diwali season, automatically the customers had come for the purchases. The demand was already existing, so the sales had taken place. But after Diwali season was over, and when there was no demand, the salesmen could not perform the sales activity. So there the training manual was not effective. And here, let me tell you, the experiment has gone wrong. So this is what the experimental error, many a times in terms of the focus group, experimental group, or the control group that is considered for the research, and basically for the exploratory research, there the things go wrong. So avoid and take proper cognizance of all these controlling measures. And last but not the least one is the data processing error. The scholar, he simply collects the data, codes the questionnaire, prepares all the Excel sheet, and then he gives it to the Excel sheet to some of the statistician or some private computer center. The data that is received is not being checked, and then they find that the data which has been processed is wrong. Unfortunately, some of the research scholars have not even noticed that the data processing error has taken place. When we evaluate the thesis, and then while conducting the viva, we identify that this process is wrong. Whatever the statistical tool that he has used and the data what he has collected, there is a mismatch. So there the data processing error has taken place, and till the last, the research scholar is unknown about it. So please avoid such unpleasant experiences during your research process. And the height of it, the data analysis error has also been carried out by some of the research scholars. For example, the table is denoting maybe some for 50% or 60%, while analyzing, this gentleman or this gentle lady is not writing 60%, but she is writing that 30% of the respondents have said this, have said that. Okay. The table is indicating a different number, and the analysis is a different number. These are all the real errors that have been committed by the research scholars. So I thought that it is my moral responsibility that before talking about the the sampling technique methods or the sampling techniques, I should make clear some of these errors and make the research scholars aware about these errors, so that your research would be a qualitative one. Now coming to the point, the prerequisites and the process of a good sampling. Now when you have to select a particular sample, you have to take some precautions. What are the precautions so that to avoid the sampling error? Number one is, the first prerequisite is that your sample should be goal oriented. When I say goal oriented, it should match with the definition of the problem, what you have identified, the objectives, what you have listed down, so that the objectives can be fulfilled with the right data that what you have to collect. So there, the sample size should be goal oriented. Number two, it should be measurable, wherein you should be able to quantify either the qualitative data or the quantitative data. And finally, it should be practical. It should be practical. So you should have access to this particular sample respondents, wherein you can measure it properly and then come out with the findings. The bottom line of the prerequisite, I would simply say that your sample should be representative sample of the population. It should representative means all the attributes which is there in the population, the sample what you select, all these sample elements should also have all those attributes. So once again, the bottom line of the prerequisite of the sample what you select should be a representative sample of the population. Along with these prerequisites, the process of a good sampling is, first, my friends, please define what is your population. Don't commit the population error what I had cited earlier. So you should define the population. Who is your population? Where is the population? What is its the total population in terms of cross verification, so on and so forth. Having defined the population, you should identify the sample frame. Where will I get the information about this particular population? And once again, please take note of the sample frame, that it should be updated, it should be complete in all respect, it should not have any duplication, and it should not be outdated. So you identify the sample frame. Having defined the population, having identified the sample frame, now you specify what is your sample unit. Suppose if your sample unit is an household, when you go to this household, your respondent would be some of the member of this particular household. So there you have to again specify what is your sample element. Please take note of sampling unit and sample element. Sample unit would be the household, sample element would be the member of the household. So you define the population, identify the frame, specify the sample unit, and now you come to what method of the sampling that you would be selecting. We'll come to those methods. So once you identify the sample method, then you decide upon the sample size. Now when you are deciding upon the sample size, what should be the appropriate sample size? How it can be a representative of the population? Here you come across two situations. Situation one is the population is finite or the population is infinite. If the population is infinite, the rule of thumb says that your sample size should be more than 30 and less than 500. This is what I'm talking about, the rule of thumb, what most of the authorities specify. If it is infinite population, please remember it should be more than 30 and less than 500. If it is above 400, fine. But for infinite population, it should exceed 384 plus. So there, your sample would be a representative sample. Now, how do you select about these 384 respondents? That we will come to it. That we will come to now. This is about the infinite population. Suppose if the population is finite, you can think of looking into the Sloven's notation, and this notation talks about n upon 1 plus n e square. So if you consider the Sloven's formula, n upon 1 plus n into bracket e square, that is e stands for a standard error, you will get with the sample size. So once you get this particular sample size with a finite population or 384 and above with an infinite population, then you decide how you go about selecting these particular sample respondents. Okay, these are some of the prerequisites and the sampling process. Now coming to the main crux of it, how do you go about the sampling techniques? Now in terms of the sampling techniques, there are certain misconceptions. Please clarify these misconceptions time and again as I would be explaining these different techniques. And one thing I would like to caution all the participants, please don't put these sampling techniques in watertight compartments. They are not mutually exclusive. Maybe you can have the combination of these. As we go about with the discussion, you'll come to know. Now take for instance, we'll start with a very simple technique. The first one is simple random sampling. Now when you say simple random sampling, which most of my scholars have memorized this particular word, random sampling, random sampling, random sampling. So what is this random sampling? Random sampling doesn't mean haphazard manner of collecting the sample respondents. It is random means it is free from human judgment. I repeat, random sampling means free from human judgment, wherein you don't allow the human judgment to interfere and disturb your sample selection process. In fact, random sampling is the most scientific method of sampling, wherein there is a probability, non-zero, known probability of every element getting selected from the population. Maybe equal probability or maybe the probability depending upon the sample and the population proportion. So in terms of the simple random sampling method, maybe you can adopt lottery method. In terms of this lottery method, say for instance, there is a population of 10 size, and out of this 10, you have to select 2 sample units. Now, how do we select these 2 sample units? You can simply number these population of 1 to 10, prepare the chits, put it in a box, shuffle it nicely, and then pick up one, then again pick up the second one. So you have the 2 sample units where you are using simple random sampling technique, lottery method. Now here, in terms of this lottery method, maybe you can think of, now suppose when you go for the second chit, and if the second chit happens to be the same one, then you replace it till you get 2 different respondents. So this is what is called as with replacement or without replacement. One can go for lottery method with replacement or without replacement. Now here what are you doing? You are attaching equal probability of every sample unit getting selected through lottery method. Now suppose the sample size is more, the population is large, then what can we do? Still adopting simple random sampling, maybe you can use of random number tables. There are so many authorities, and one of the most popular is the Tippett's random number table. So from these random tables, you can number your population. Having given the numbers to the population, maybe say for instance, the population is of 5,000. Okay. Now in terms of this 5,000, you can give the random numbers for this population, say starting from 1,000 to 5,000. Okay. So then from these random tables, you have to pick up. And let me tell you, you want to have a sample size of 500 out of this 5,000. So till you get the 500 respondents, which is numbered from 1 to 5,000, random numbers you come across. Either you go horizontally or you go vertically. You come across random numbers. Some of the random numbers may be starting with 6,000. They are 4-digit numbers. So in terms of this 4-digit number, some numbers may be from the starting 9,000 plus, some may be 8,000, some may be 6,000. So all those random numbers which are below 5,000, you go on picking up till you come across 500 sample size. This is making use of random number tables. So these are the two methods in terms of the simple random sampling technique. Then now suppose you are not satisfied with this simple random sampling technique. You want to have little more scientificness in this sampling selection. So you can think of systematic sampling, another technique. What is this systematic sampling? As the name suggests, you have to find out a little systematic method of identifying the sample size. In terms of the systematic sampling, you have to find out the sample fraction first. What is the sample fraction, which is also known as sample interval or sample ratio? Suppose you have a population of 500 and you want to have a sample size of 50. You need to find out in systematic sampling the sample fraction. For sample fraction, you have to use the notation or the ratio population divided by the sample size. Population is 500 divided by 50, you get a sample fraction of 10. I hope it is clear. 500 population divided by sample size 50 gives you a sample fraction of 10. Now when you have this sample fraction of 10, you number these 10 1 to 10, and having numbered 1 to 10 for this sample fraction, make use of simple random sampling technique and then go for a lottery method and pick up one number from this sample fraction. And say for example, you come across a sample number of 7. Having come across a 7, you have the 500 population which you have numbered from 1 to 500. So 7 is your sample fraction, what you have selected through simple random technique. Then you pick up the sample size of 50, numbering 7, 17, 27, 37, so on up to 497. You calculate these numbers, you will come across 50 sample size. This is systematic sampling technique. And in this systematic sampling technique, what are you doing? You are bringing in the sample interval, picking up one item number, and then with the help of that you are using simple random sampling and then identify. This is systematic sampling. Now, in case if the population is too large and the population is not homogeneous, then what? So there, if the population is heterogeneous, there you have to think of maybe another technique. And this particular sampling tool or the technique that you can talk about is stratified random sampling. Now, what is a strata? A strata is mutually exclusive and mutually exhaustive. For instance, strata for a population of human beings happens to be an individual with a demographic variable on the basis of gender, male or female, or on the basis of age, where you have a class interval up to 20 years, 21 to 30 years, 31 to 40 years, and so on. You have the class interval where you are using a variable of age. So in terms of demographic variable, with the different variables, demographic base, different variables such as gender, age, income, education, occupation, religion, nationality. You can a number of variables, and those variables which you want to consider for your particular study, those variables you have to take up. And then you have to have identify the stratas. And having identified these strategies, divide this population into these different strategies, into different stratas, and in each strata, you come across the population getting divided with a homogeneity in each strata. Then you pick up from each strata some sample elements, and the total put together will be the sample size where you are using, say, stratified random sampling. Population, heterogeneous population is divided into different stratas. From each strata, you are picking up the sample units by making use of, once again, random sampling technique along with stratification. That is why it is known as stratified random sampling technique. Now when you are doing this, the question is what should be the basis of stratification. You have to define the base of stratification. As I said, now the base of individual human being is the demographic variable. Similarly, if it is a social stratification, okay, if it is a social stratification, maybe the different levels of social strata, upper class, middle class, lower class, or rich class, middle class, and poor class. Like this, you have different strata. So what you need to do is you need to divide the population into different stratas, and from each strata you pick up the samples. Now the question is, what is the basis and what should be the number of the stratas? Once again, the rule of thumb says that there has to be not more than 6 stratas. That is an ideal stratification. As far as possible, don't try to stretch too many stratas. There, the data collection becomes complicated. So the number of stratas and the basis of stratification has to be specified, and then adopt stratified random sampling technique. Then your sample would be probabilistic sampling without any human judgment interruption. The question is, from each stratus, how would you select? What number would you select? So there you have 2 techniques to adopt. One is maybe proportionate sampling or disproportionate sampling. What is proportionate sampling? From each strata, you take up a proportion, 10% from first strata, 10% from second, 10% from third strata, so on and so forth. That is proportionate sampling. Now say for instance, within these stratas, there is some heterogeneity, then it is always advisable to go for disproportionate stratified random sampling. Why? Because the sample is not homogeneous. If it is perfect homogeneous, go for proportionate random sampling in each stratus. Okay. Otherwise, we have to go for the disproportionate stratified random sampling. This is about the third technique. Then there is another technique, what is called as cluster sampling. Now, what is the cluster sampling? And what is the difference between stratified random sampling and cluster sampling? Now, in terms of stratified random sampling, from each stratus you are picking up some of the respondent elements. But in cluster sampling, you pick up the whole cluster. For instance, you divide one of the city into different wards. Say Ward A, Ward B, Ward C, Ward D, and so on. And then in each ward, you have different households. Say for example, you have to select some of their households. So while selecting this particular house also, we don't want to go for stratified random sampling. We want to go for cluster sampling. So in terms of this cluster sampling, you suppose there are 5 wards, you have 5 clusters. So you pick up any 2 clusters with lottery method, again random sampling technique, right? With random sampling techniques, 5 wards, 5 chits you put up, and then randomization with equal probability, you select 2 wards, and then all the households in these 2 wards you go and collect the data from. This is cluster sampling. So in cluster sampling, what are you doing? You are taking all the respondents from the cluster. But in stratified random sampling, from each strata you are picking up different respondent elements. This is the difference between cluster sampling and stratified random sampling. Okay. Again, in stratas, most of the elements within each strata would be homogeneous. But in cluster sample, in each cluster, not necessarily all the elements would be homogeneous. There would be heterogeneity. But since you are using a cluster sampling, you take the entire cluster and then you go for the data analysis after. Then there is another stage, another technique that is known as multi-stage sampling. Now, when do you use this particular multi-stage sampling? Most of the surveys that is carried out at the national level by the national agencies. So there you have to have the data from the entire country. Then under such situation, you have to go for multi-stage sampling. So in terms of the multi-stage sampling, you have to have different stages, and under each stage, you come across different sampling units. For instance, the country is divided into states. You decide the states, you select the states. From each state, you select the districts. From each district, you select the talukas. From each taluka, you select the villages. In this way, you go for stage by stage, and then decide upon as to how many respondents from the state, from the district, from the taluka, or from the village. So like this, you go for multi-stage sampling technique. And basically, multi-stage sampling technique has to be adopted when you are going for the study at the state level or say at the national level, where you have the respondents scattered all over. That is the multi-stage sampling. There is another technique, what is called as area sampling. Now, in terms of the area sampling, in multi-stage sampling, you are having different stages: primary units, secondary units, third stage units. Like this, you have different stage units. But in terms of the area units, what are you doing? You are dividing the entire state or the entire nation into different areas, and these areas you define as maybe northern part, southern part, eastern part, western part, central part. And then from each of these directions, you select the sample units. This is area sampling technique. And here, instead of having the respondent lists or the respondents frame, the geographical area maps are used basically for the GIS, geographical information system. When it is being collected, you go for area sampling. The area is divided into the entire nation is, or the state is divided into different areas, and from each area you pick up the respondents. That is the area sampling technique. Similarly, you have a multi-phase sampling technique. Now, what is multi-phase sampling and what is multi-stage sampling? In multi-stage sampling, at each stage, the sampling unit is changing. But in terms of multi-phase sampling, the data is being collected under two different phases from the same respondent. For instance, in multi-phase sampling, say for example, you want to study the quality of medical services rendered by the primary health care centers. Okay, then most of the population do not undertake the services of primary healthcare center because we know the quality of the service that is being given at these centers. So therefore, under multi-phase sampling, you have to ask the respondent first of all that whenever you have undertaken medical services, have you gone to a primary healthcare center? If he says no, then you have to go to the second respondent. And if he says yes, then you go for further investigation in terms of the quality of the services at that primary center, in terms of the nursing staff, so on and so forth. So here, what are we doing in multi-phase? Under different phases, we are collecting the information from the same respondent at different phases, because the nature of the study is such that at one stretch you cannot collect the entire data. Therefore, we go for multi-phase sampling in this particular technique. The other sampling techniques are non-probabilistic sampling. They are not probabilistic. So far what I have talked about, they are all probability sampling, because nowhere human judgment comes into picture. You are not manipulating any of the selection process. The other techniques where it is known as non-probabilistic sampling technique is quota sampling. And this particular quota sampling is most of the time used in marketing research. Why? Because in marketing research, when you collect the data from either the buyers, users, potential customers, you need to have certain conditions fulfilled. What are these conditions? Maybe the number of buyers, male members, female members, children, and so like this, you have certain parameters. So these parameters and the quota is being fixed up. Therefore, the quota sampling technique, you decide a particular quota out of the population and simply go and collect the data on the basis of the availability of the respondent. As the name itself suggests, what you decide beforehand, you decide a quota. Okay, for my study, this much quota is sufficient, and by the time you fulfill this particular quota, you go on collecting the data. And those who would be interested in participating in the study, you take the responses from them. Those who are not interested, you go to the next. Like this, you continue your study till you complete your quota or the predetermined quota. Another non-probabilistic technique is judgment sampling, which is also known as purposive sampling. Why judgmental sampling or purposive sampling? Because the respondent from whom you need to collect the data, he and he alone can give you that information, not any other respondent. You have to go to him. That is why it is known as purposive sampling, or you use your judgment and go to that particular respondent and collect the data. Say for instance, the behavioral pattern of prisoners or the psychological state of cancer patients, such type of studies. You cannot go to a non-cancer patient. You cannot go to an ordinary citizen who is not a prisoner. You have to go to a prisoner to study his behavioral pattern. To study the attitude of the cancer patient, you have to go to him. So under such situation, you have to go for purposive sampling or judgment sampling. There you make use of purposive quota sampling. That is why I said earlier, don't put all these sampling techniques into watertight compartments, right? So the judgment sampling or the purposive sampling along with the quota sampling. And the last technique, non-probabilistic technique, is convenience sampling, which is also called as accidental sampling. And 50% of my scholars go for convenience sampling, and they claim that they have gone for random sampling. This accident sampling or convenience sampling is undertaken depending upon the convenience of the scholar based on the time, money, and the energy he has to spare for collecting the data. So that is where you have three sampling techniques which come under the purview of non-probabilistic sampling, that is quota, judgment, and convenience sampling. Rest all the other sampling techniques, right from simple random sampling till the multi-phase sampling, they are all the probabilistic sampling techniques. Now coming to the conclusion, maybe the frequently asked questions in terms of this, sir, what sampling technique should I take for my particular study? Very simply, imprecise, stratified random sampling. It is a probabilistic, and when the heterogeneous population is there, you go for stratified random sampling. Several different groups are there, so stratified random sampling justifies. Say, for example, if the population is made of units instead of individuals, I repeat, if the population is made of units instead of individuals and you have to go for probabilistic sampling, go for cluster sampling. If not, these stratas are present. There are stratas in your study, but stratified sampling is not possible because of certain constraints. Go for quota sampling. This is the sampling techniques what one can think of using under probabilistic and non-probabilistic sampling. So I hope I have shared all my experiences and discussed some of the errors, the preconceived notions or the fallacies have been shared with you, and finally the different 10 techniques of sampling which is there, where you can make use of permutation and combination of these sampling techniques. So finally, to conclude my talk, I would thank the organizers and the cyber management for giving me this opportunity to share my experiences. And if there are certain questions, we are free to answer those questions. Any questions?
Thank you very much, sir. The very exhaustive insights about the most important part of the research. So now the session is open for the question
Discussion or the questions, inviting the questions.
Any participant would like to ask a question?
Yeah. I myself will ask some question to Ali sir.
Yeah, please.
Ali sir, your presentation is very nice, as usual. Always excellent, extraordinary. Now, on behalf of participants,
Okay.
I just want to make you to clarify.
Right.
Sampling error, is it one of the inevitable component of research?
Sampling error.
Yeah.
Not necessarily, sir. Why? Because suppose if the sampling technique is highly scientific,
Barabar.
okay,
Yes.
sampling error would be minimized, and then your sample mean would be approaching closer to the population mean, provided we take some precautions and human judgment element does not interfere biasness doesn't come in while picking up the respondents.
Right.
Only those respondents through your probability which have come into your sample should be approached and collected. Then I would say that this sample error would be the minimum.
Okay. That means sample errors are admissible. They're
Yes,
accepted.
sample errors would take place, and that is why the statisticians say 95% level of significance.
It is not ideal.
Yeah,
Ideal
they give an a margin an error of 0.05.
0.5. Correct. Sir. Thank you so much.
Right, sir. Right, sir.
Thank you so much. Good presentation, sir, once again.
Okay, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any more questions from the participant side? Okay, it seems then being it is 1:45.
Yeah, we have
So
stretched
I'll take
15
the
minutes.
opportunity to summarize the entire session, being a session coordinator. So today's topic is on selecting appropriate sampling technique in research. As I mentioned in my introduction, this is one of the important aspect of while doing research to take care of. One is the defining the research problem, then according to the need of the research problem, stating the hypothesis, then to test the hypothesis, you need to have a reliable and valid data. So to collect reliable and valid data, you need to have a right sampling tool, which completes your work 50%. So today's speaker, Dr. M.M. Ali sir, has spoken on various aspects of sampling. So first step, he corrected about what are the most possible errors in terms of like most of the fallacies which a researcher holds and come to the research guide. And many times both the researcher as well as the research guide get stuck into these kind of mistakes in terms of number of pages or diagrams used, whether it is necessary or not, and then or limiting the review of literature, which gives actually or which widens the perspective of a researcher in a much broader way. Then he focused on what are the other errors which took place in the research process, both in terms of sampling and non-sampling errors. So under the sampling errors, he has highlighted in terms of problem identification error, then how to choose the right population, what mistakes a researcher does in this regard, then frame error, then measurement error, then very importantly for survey-based studies, the questionnaire or the case study. Also there you will have certain questions which you frame to ask to the respondents. Then you will also doing focus group interviews, schedules. So here questions plays a very, very important role to get the uh, essence of the respondent's opinion. So how to construct a questionnaire and how to avoid the mistakes in a questionnaire. Then how to choose the study variables. This is again an important element of research study. Then experimental errors, data processing, data analysis. Generally, the research scholars get overlooked in these two areas, data processing and analysis. So utmost care has to be taken by the researcher because it is his or her responsibility to minimize the errors of processing as well as analysis. So then sir has focused the main part, that is various techniques to be used while selecting or choosing your right sample. So both we are having a sampling, random sampling methods and non-random sampling methods. And sir has presented a very unique examples in order to simply understand these methods. I think though we might have read in our research methodology uh, number of times or hundreds of times the definitions, but still we will get stuck into understand what is the real meaning of these techniques. So today's session, Dr. M.M. Ali sir has explained in a much deeper but yet in a simple language how to understand these different techniques and how to identify the right sample and how to avoid the errors in this process. So I, Dr. Kishore Kumar, on behalf of the management committee of this FDP, extend a warm gratitude to Dr. M.M. Ali sir for his valuable time and the knowledge input which he has presented today. And I also extend the congratulations to the management committee on behalf of the all the participants. So we will be going for lunch break now. And again, the next session will start at sharply 2:30. The next session will be on measurement and scaling techniques by Dr. Bijit Thomas. Now there is a small announcement by, okay, I think M.M. Ali sir would like to share something.
No, I would like to simply thank you, all the participants, for their patient listening, and Kishore Kumar for a nice anchoring and integrating our talk.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
So,
you, thank you.
over to
Shall I-
Dr. Sonia Rajput, the session coordinator.
Yeah.
Hello.
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 Yes,
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody.
Rajput madam.
I'm really grateful to you, sir, Ali sir. It was really very informative and enlightening. This thing put in a very simple words. I'm
Okay.
sure the participants have benefited with that, sir.
Yeah,
Thank you
please
so
let me
much for
know feedback.
such a short notice. You all have
Yeah.
made it an
Get the
achievement
feedback-
for us.
Get the feedback from them and let me know.
Yes, sir, 100%.
So how are the things going on at Cyber?
Everything is fine, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay. best-
And the participants already, Kishore Kumar sir is announced for the afternoon session. It is by B.G. Thomas ma'am, measurements and scaling. And we have repeatedly been giving you an instruction about muting your mic. Kindly see that
mics are muted
and your cameras are off. And on the display, you should have your number, registration number. We are finding it very difficult to trace you all out. And then you all will have a problem if the for certifications and all that, because this goes directly to the Atal portal. Kindly cooperate. It's an earnest request that your display should have your number. Majority of them are not having the numbers. Like 111, Vijay Lakshmi Mahesh, she has given a full name. 120, Mahesh Kumar Thorat has given the full name. I want
Hello.
everybody to do the same thing. Thank
Ma'am,
you
is
so
that,
much.
ma'am, is that
Yes.
okay that first comes our name and the second comes the register number?
That is also okay, but preferably we would like, because we can trace you all out faster.
Okay, check.
And your Excel sheet has come with that numbers first.
Yes, okay.
Hello, ma'am. There was one question.
Yeah.
Hello,
Rahul, please go ahead.
मैम उसमें कैसे एडिट करना है? अब जैसे मैम
When-
हाउ टू एडिट द नेम रजिस्टर्ड नंबर कैसे डालना है वो उसके आगे अपने नाम के आगे?
Yeah. You have to go to your mail ID and where your display is there, na? There you have to write your name and change that. Edit login.
अच्छा
है
वहां से
उधर.
करना है क्या? मैं
हाँ.
ओके फाइन मैम.
By the next session, I expect that so that it will help us for the attendance. Is there any questions or any doubts from anybody, or we close for now and we'll start back at 2:30 sharp? You have to come. You have to join and no, not at 2:30. 2:30 the session will start, and at least 10 minutes before you all should be logged in.
हेलो मैम. हेलो.
Yes, Jeevan.
हाँ मैम रजिस्ट्रेशन.
Yes, Jeevan, you can speak.
हाँ मैम वो अटेंडेंस का कोई प्रॉब्लम नहीं ना?
We'll check it after the session is over.
ओके.
Now it's recording. We have an auto recording.
हाँ.
But please, because we won't know everybody's names, somebody is logging in from different mail ID and all that, it becomes difficult for us to track.